Hi there, welcome to my talk. My name is Kaelan Osborne, and it's a privilege to be able to share some of my PhD research findings with you today. This talk is called Why Do Companies Democratize Artificial Intelligence? An empirical analysis of artificial intelligence open source software donations to the Linux Foundation. So my talk has 5 parts. Let's go over here. Let's move my face up here. Okay, so firstly, I'll introduce myself as a speaker. I'll explain the research motivation behind this. I'll describe my research methodology. Then I'll introduce some of the initial findings, and I'll conclude with some of the main contributions and next steps. So without further ado, let's jump in. So firstly, who am I? Well, I'm sorry you see my face twice on the screen now. My name is Kaelan. I'm a PhD candidate in social data science at the Oxford Internet Institute. My research focus is the political economy of open source AI. This research is fully funded by the UK government's Economic and Social Research Council. And so this study is part of my overall thesis. And a full disclaimer, during the period of data collection, I was undertaking a research internship at the Linux Foundation, but this research was independently conducted and funded. So why did I decide to research this? Well, Elizabeth Sagar and her colleagues published this preprint a couple of months ago, which shows that more and more companies are using this discourse of AI democratization to characterize their activities in the kind of broader AI ecosystem, but it's not always clear what they mean. And what these authors do quite helpfully is contribute a taxonomy of potential meanings to help us decipher what they mean. So the authors come up with 4 different kind of sub-meanings. First is access. So what companies really mean when they democratize AI is that they are providing access to and use of technologies. Second meaning is development. So this is particularly the case of open source software, where participation is enabled in the development of AI technologies. Third is profits, where companies share their profits. The fourth is governance, where the kind of decision-making process involved in the development and distribution of advanced AI technologies incorporates the views of and inputs of a wider variety of stakeholders than just the developers themselves. So what they conclude is that democratization is mostly an unfortunate term, because in most cases it just means widening access to technologies, and in some cases enabling participation. And they suggest that companies use more specific terminology that is more accurate and helpful in the kind of wider discourse about the way AI is developing and how it is increasingly influencing our society. So here's 2 more critical stances on this question. The first is by Nick Srinichek, who last year wrote this article in which he describes that open source software is not so much an alternative, but actually a strategic tool for big tech companies to influence the AI field. And he makes this argument with in relation to PyTorch and TensorFlow, this kind of contest of 2 deep learning frameworks made by Meta and Google, respectively. However, note that Meta donated PyTorch to the Linux Foundation last summer. He says the seemingly non-capitalist practice of releasing AI software for free actually obscures a significant capitalist battle between these companies. And more recently, David Witter et al., Meredith Whittaker, and Sarah Myers-West published a preprint of Open for Business, in which they cut through the hype around open source AI and show how different companies have used rhetoric for and against open source AI to strengthen their dominant positions in the wake of increasing attention on AI regulation. So clearly there's a lot going on behind these claims to democratize AI, and what my research tries to do is to extend this small but growing body of research, which is trying to unpack the commercial motivations behind it. So what is my methodology? Firstly, the research question broadly is, why do companies democratize AI? And to be more specific, I ask, why do companies donate AI software? What is my methodology? Well, the first thing to say is that prior research has extensively examined various types of commercial activity in the wider open source software ecosystem. Note, not just AI, but open source in general. However, open source software donations have received limited attention to date. So that's what we're really trying to tackle here with this research. So I study the commercial incentives behind 43 donations by various companies, from startups with less than 5 employees to multinational corporations, to 2 foundations at the Linux Foundation. Firstly, the LF AI Data Foundation, which is a foundation that focuses on fostering collaboration on open source software for data science and AI, as well as the PyTorch Foundation, which was established last September specifically to support the PyTorch framework that Meta had donated. And these donations were made between May 2018 and October 2022. The sources of data that I used for this analysis comprise pre-donation pitches made by engineers to the foundation about why their software project should be accepted, post-donation announcements, which include blogs and press releases by the companies and the foundation, as well as questionnaires and interviews with maintainers and foundation staff in order to get insights from individuals about why these donations took place. So let's move on to the findings. So there are 3 buckets of findings I want to share with you. The first is donation is a contested term. So it's the most used term, but it's inaccurate and confusing. An employee of the Linux Foundation explained to me that it's misleading because the foundation is not, quote unquote, taking ownership of the code. The source code has copyright, and the owners of the copyright will always be the owners of the copyright. So the foundation is not taking anything away. What they are doing is taking the business governance is transferring to the foundation. So they take over the assets, the GitHub repository, the social media accounts, the trademark, and so on. But the development itself continues as is. The second reason why it's a contested term is that obscure self-interest amongst companies. One of the maintainers told me that, one of the reasons why companies donate open source software or open source it is because they hope to get help from external contributors, which wouldn't be possible if it was just a company project. So there's this trade-off that they make where they give up full control of the project, they adopt open governance, and then hope to and basically this attracts external contributors who help them build a better software product. The other reason why it's a contested term is that it's self-interested for individuals. One of the maintainers explained that having your project accepted by a prestigious institution like the Linux Foundation gives you a lot of credibility in the eyes of your peers and open source software developers, and it also gets you closer to your dream of having a successful open source software project. So let's keep these things in mind when we think about incentives for donations. So moving on to these incentives. Trigger warning, incoming information overload, there are many incentives. Here's an overview of the various incentives identified in my research. If you want to read all of them, I recommend pausing the video and taking your time, but in the interest of time and your attention span, I'm going to move on and highlight the most important ones. The first thing to mention is something that the executive director of both foundations, Dr. Ibrahim Haddad, explained. Companies have various motivations and incentives for donating software. And these donation incentives really depend on the type of company, the industry they're in, as well as the maturity of the project. And also companies have different incentives for donating different types of projects. But what is common is this desire to make the project successful. And what does successful mean? Well, it means making the project the de facto project for the given functionality. In other words, to become an open standard. So let's go back to the incentives. How do you get there? The first really important thing that maintainers and foundation staff highlighted was this shift to vendor-neutral open governance, which is afforded by having your project hosted by the Linux Foundation, because it's a requirement of the foundation. This enables various downstream benefits. For example, it enables collaboration between companies, including market rivals, which might not usually work together to develop software. This in turn diversifies funding, which helps introduce stable funding for smaller projects, as well as scale investment for bigger projects. It improves the software through various types of external contributions, from feedback to actual code contributions. It helps increase visibility and adoption, which also in turn helps get more feedback and contributions. It enables integration with other Linux Foundation projects, which equally have this open governance model. It enables interoperability with other open source software projects in the wider open source AI stack. And ultimately, it helps influence or shape open standards. Now, there are other incentives here which I'm not highlighting, but you can see that there are various social, economic, and technological incentives at play. Finally, what do they mean when they say they're democratizing AI, when they donate open source software? So leaning on Elizabeth Sagard and her colleagues' framework of 4 meanings, I find that there are 3 meanings in the context of donations. The first is widening access to and use of AI. But these projects, at least in this sample, were already open source, so that's mostly just marketing talk. Secondly, to pluralize governance, and that's done by adopting the open governance model. That's more convincing. And 3, widening participation in the development by attracting contributors who value the open governance model. Now let's remember the critical stances I introduced at the beginning of this talk, as well as the kind of reasons why donation is a contested term when we think about widening participation development. This is not just in the interest of the ecosystem, it's also in the interest of the company, because they will be benefiting from an expanded contributor base who can help them make a better software product and ultimately influence or shape open standards. Now let's conclude. So we've seen companies have lots of different incentives. Social incentives tend to work in service of economic and technological incentives. For example, I've shown how adopting an open governance model helps them attract new contributors. The third point to make is democratizing AI in the context of donations has several meanings, including democratizing access. But I made the point that it's not that convincing because the projects were already open source. It means democratizing governance via the open governance model. And it means democratizing development by attracting new contributors who value open governance. Finally, this taxonomy, I hope, will provide researchers and practitioners with a toolkit that can be used to unpack commercial incentives when companies claim to democratize AI. So for example, when you see companies claim to democratize AI when they open source AI models, it might be useful to think about these incentives to figure out, why are they actually doing this. Now, let me finish by saying thank you very much for watching my video. If you have any feedback or ideas of other incentives, please reach out to me. My email address is here on the slide. I'd be very grateful for any feedback or thoughts you have. In the meantime, have a great summit and see you. Bye.